Good afternoon to everyone joining us today.
Good afternoon to everyone joining us today. Sorry about that. Thank you for joining our webinar, which is hosted by the SDG Philanthropy Platform. Today, the topic of our webinar is mainstreaming SDGs in national development plans, and we'll be hearing experience and lessons from Zambia. Just a quick note to everyone listening today that the webinar is being recorded, and after the presentations, there will be an opportunity for the audience members to ask questions to the panelists, and this can be done through the chat or questions section. Before I hand over to the panelists to start their presentations, I'll just give a brief overview of the topic. So Zambia has recently developed its 7th National Development Plan, which will run from 2017 to 2021, and it's held under the theme of accelerating development efforts towards Vision 2030 without leaving anyone behind. The plan is to create a diversified, resilient economy for sustained growth and socio-economic transformation driven by, amongst other things, agriculture. So there are 5 interrelated, mutually enforcing strategic development areas, which will be alluded to in the presentation. Among other things, the Zambian government has used the plan to domesticate several of its international development commitments, including the UN's Agenda 23 on Sustainable Development and the African Union's Agenda 2063. So recognizing the interrelatedness of the development priorities under the SDGs, the AU Agenda 2063, and indeed the 7th National Development Plan, the government has moved from a sectoral-based approach to development planning to a multi-sectoral one. So this presentation will be an opportunity for others to hear about Zambia's process in developing the plan, their experience, and lessons learned. So we'll introduce the speakers. I have Mr. Richard, Assistant Director at the Department of Planning from Ministry of National Development Planning, and Ms. Bimbanashe Mukota, who is the Monitoring and Evaluation Specialist in the UN Resident Coordinator's Office in Zambia. So.
Good afternoon to everyone. This is Richard speaking. I think I've been introduced by the hostess here. My task today is just to give a brief. Mainly I will focus on volume planning is not a new phenomenon to Zambia. We started this when Zambia was born, and since 1964 we've had about 6 plans, and and to achieve these plans have been the 7th National, the 3rd one in the series. And I wish to share with you that this plan, the volume 1, is a strategic policy document. Mainly for when we move to governments, we have developed. I think I wish to know that the plan is underpinned by the decentralization concepts, as well as the agendas that the country has signed. The hostess also sent framework. Then also the theory of change. There was an issues paper which was produced just to issues that Zambia was facing the plan. The plan implementing now is based on integrated multi-sector approach, as opposed to the past and that are implemented. Now, to just straight, I'll just point out items that this is used and the one that we are implementing now. Previously, we had a sort of a silo approach where each sector was planning in isolation. More or less from other sectors. This led to poor coordination, and there was lack of value for money because there was a lot of duplication in some cases, and the lack of coordination meant to before. But the new integration, we are targeting a key vision to be more. Well, we've also restructured our coordination bodies, meaning we see a situation whereby there's better coordination in terms of what we want to achieve. I think I can move on to the plan itself. As alluded to earlier, the plan has five key development areas. These are economic diversification and job creation, and these we foresee being driven by agriculture, tourism, and mining, amongst others. These are the plans. Then we have the second pillar on poverty and vulnerability, and then we have reducing developmental inequalities, and is human development. The last one, in terms of the five pillars, is creating a conducive governance environment for a diversified economy. But takes cognizance of cross issues such as climate change, disaster risk reduction, gender inequality, and HIV/AIDS. Then there's that I alluded to. Then to achieve those outcomes, we are with the below pillar. Then below that, we move on to from the program goal. That's where we start looking at the implementation plan or the volume 2. So as I've said, the integration amongst these various pillars is key to achieving what the plan intends to do. So we see a situation where that they are self-reinforcing and mutually reinforcing. For example, we have a vulnerability context of the different pillars. We will see that economic diversification contributes to reduction of poverty in terms of creating contributes to identifying. This is sectors like agriculture and tourism being the drivers. We have now the strategies like on transport and infrastructure, ICT, that we seek to reinforce. And attend through this plan. Again, another illustration is when we look at the irrigation bring tourists on air management. other sectors like energy will come in. So issues of when you build infrastructure, you need access to energy. We need access to, and also provide not just water for drinking or water for construction, but it will be also water for entertainment for the tourists. So you have to manage the water to reinforce them. Then you also need to come to the issue to be fencing the issue here I want to emphasize that government has seen the issue of not just integrating activities, but also sequencing of programs. For example, when you're doing a farm block, we've had the experience whereby certain activities haven't been done in proper sequence, resulting in misuse of, rather misapplication of resources, and in some cases, mismatch of activities leading to poor results. For example, if we are going to develop a farm block, we have to ask ourselves, which one do we start first? Which activities do we do at the same time? Which activities are we going to fund first? So that we will see a situation whereby if it's a new farm, we'll probably say the lands people move in first, probably to demarcate and define the move in. So these are some of the things we are looking at, and that we also have to show it an outgrower. We need to know at which point it comes in, so that our resources are planned at a now to actualize the plan, we've revised some of the coordination structures, and we've revised them as you can see the screen there. At the 5 bills or cluster advisors are headed by permanent secretaries, and the advisors within them have technical working groups which are headed by directors. But that is not the only working group that we have. At the Apex, we have what we call National Development Coordinating Committee. This is the Apex body that advises development issues. It's made up mainly by the Secretary of Cabinet and the permanent secretaries. Then, as I said, our plan is also anchored on centralization. How it works is from the cluster, more or less the level of ministerial, provincial development coordinating committees, and below that we have, and we also envisage to have ward development committees, which are the lowest. So in that sense, we'll bring in particular. Then we should know that these levels are made up of multi-stakeholders from the government, parastatals, civil society, private sector, and other development partners, and also the component of M&E. We also follow the same. So even the monitoring of projects is also done at various levels. Okay. So about the 7 NDP, just giving a few highlights that we are discussing on the role of philanthropy in the 7 NDP. I think I wish to share with you to say that we have, say, linked or aligned to this. And so philanthropy will have a chance to have its say and to make sure that its actions are implemented through the SDG philanthropy platform, with the current thematic focus rather being on the well-being of children. I think in the pillar for enhancing human development, I think this links very well with the role of philanthropy, education, being of our children, opportunities on reducing poverty and vulnerabilities, or even also impact on the well-being. Tackling all these, the role of philanthropy is we'll find a niche in all these. So they can reinforce development strategic areas are linked, and I might also point out that the intersectoral results-based 7NDP provides an opportunity for foundations and other organizations that are to place a strong on addressing these concerns in there will be done at the level of the implementation plan, but it's given as a valued area, then to the SDG topic are linked to the country. I think at this point I want to hand over to my colleague to continue the presentation.
Okay, good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Vimbai Nashom Kota, and I'm the MND Coordinator's Office for UN Zambia, and mainly our role was of SDGs and also the Agenda 2063. This was upon the request by the government for us as the UN to support them in moving from into. So they did consult us in terms of their inputs into the volume listed. But when it came to volume 2, they opened it up to us, the UN, and even other stakeholders for us to come in and support the development of this volume 2. So that is where our role came into play. The first role that we provided was really a normative role, which is one of our roles as the UN. And this was to provide technical and expert guidance in articulating what are the key interventions or what are the building blocks for the achievement of the 7 National Development Plan. And to do this, we looked at, we compiled a resource base of policies, guidelines, and standards which are aligned to the SDGs, to the Sendai framework, and to other international commitments that Zambia has ratified or signed. We also looked into issues of how do we align the 7 National Development Plan to the core programming principles, which have the overarching principle of leaving no one behind, and the other principles of human rights, gender equality, and women's empowerment, sustainability and resilience, and accountability. And in terms of accountability, this is where we provided evidence to support the government and the key stakeholders with developing volume 2 in terms of data, so that they're able to target or able to really reprogram the 7 National Development Plan accordingly. There was a sub-national analysis document that was also produced with the UN and together with government, and a rapid integrated assessment, which is a gap analysis of the volume 1 to see to what extent the SDGs have been covered in volume 1, so that if there are any gaps, they can be addressed in volume 2. There was also a rapid country profile, which the UN led together with government, which provided the status in terms of social and economic indicators that also gave a baseline of where the country is and where it should go. The second key role was on the capacity development, where as the UN, we looked into how the 7 National Development Plan Volume 2 design is aligned to the theory of change approach. And already the government adopted the logical framework approach. So we reinforced that with the results-based management, the theory of change, and provided support in terms of the technical expertise. In addition, we used also our convening role as the UN to strengthen the capacity for integrated planning. And this was to bring in, to ensure that all the key players are involved in the development of Volume 2. As you know, the Volume 2 is the implementation plan. So this is the how we're going to implement the Volume 1. What are the building blocks and what is it that we need to really do for us to be able to achieve the results? And we followed again that logical framework and results-based approach. So in short, I would look at the key deliverables by the UN as follows, as 5 of them. The first one was really to come up with a methodology for the development of Volume 2. As this was actually the second attempt of the government of Republic of Zambia to come up with an implementation plan. In the past national development plans, they would only have one document, which was the Volume 1. So this Volume 2, it was a second attempt, and also it is in the era of the Agenda 2030. So it's the first time that is being done in this SDG era. So we're to come up with a 9-step methodology of how we move from Volume 1 to Volume 2. What are the key issues that we really need to look at? And there was also need for a template for the Volume 2, as there was no template before. So a template of how it would look like. This was also another deliverable by the UN. Thirdly, which was really very key, is the rapid integrated assessment, which is the gap analysis of Volume 1. This exercise is quite an intense exercise, which we did together, the UN and the government. And we spent about 2 weeks working day in and out, assessing the Volume 1 by all the 20 development outcomes that are in the Volume 1. And then we're checking against the 169 targets of the SDGs to see how we are aligned with each of these. And for Zambia, we didn't look at all the 17 goals. We focused on 14 goals, leaving out the ones which are not so relevant to us, like life underwater, and also the means of implementation. SDG 17, we did not look into that. So we pretty much looked at most of them. And I'll go into detail on that later in the next slides. The rapid country profile, I've already talked about it. It's just a rapid review of relevant national literature and data on all the domains of sustainable development. As a reference document, is we did the targeting for the 2017-2021 7th plan. The other key deliverable by the UN was the development of tools and guidance to help the technical working groups and the cluster advisory groups as they developed the contents of Volume 2. And with these tools and guidance, we focused on these 4 areas: climate change and DRR mainstreaming. There were some tools that were developed to ensure that climate change is well mainstreamed across the 5 pillars that have been mentioned earlier. The second one was on leaving no one behind principle. We had to come up with a checklist also to ensure that we've managed to really address this principle across the 5 pillars. This also included the gender mainstreaming. The interesting one was also the horizontal policy coherence proofing, because now we have to look at how aligned are we across the 5 pillars. As my colleague has already mentioned from the government, that the plan is really interlinked. There are interlinkages across the pillars. So it was important that there is a horizontal policy coherence as well as the vertical in terms of going down to the districts, which is the next step that we are going to support the government with moving on. So in terms of this rapid integrated assessment, this is a tool that is in the UNDG MAPS, the Mainstreaming Acceleration Policy Support document that has been produced by the UNDG. And we made reference to this document, and we were able to undertake the exercise. From the 100 SDG targets across the 14 SDGs that I talked about, we saw that the Volume 1, 52% of the SDG targets are fully aligned to the 7 National Development Plan. 33% were not aligned and 15% were partially aligned. This didn't look so bad because the key, where you find where it's not aligned, it was more on the indicators. We realized that they were not, the indicators were not well articulated to really measure progress against the SDG targets that were linked to the pillars in the volume 1. And this was something that could easily be addressed in the volume 2. So in terms of the gaps, before I go to the gaps, if I show you in terms of the order of prioritization of the plan itself, according to the rapid integrated assessment that we undertook, you realize that the 7 National Development Plan focuses quite highly on SDG 1, which is poverty, and SDG 2 on hunger, followed by SDG 10, reduced inequality, and then infrastructure and development. We did realize that climate change, you see it's at the bottom there, the third bottom. The issues of gender comes out at number 5. And yes, we do have a pillar which has reduced developmental inequalities, which is a strategy, actually, dedicated strategy on gender inequality issues. But what was missing was the mainstreaming across the other 4 pillars, which was not very clear which is not very clear in volume 1. Same with climate change. Climate change, you could see it's been tackled here and there, but it was not well mainstreamed. So these were the kind of gaps that we noticed in volume 1 and needed to be addressed in volume 2, which is the implementation plan. So the key gaps, as I already highlighted, was the mainstreaming climate change resilience, mainstreaming of gender, particularly issues of gender-based violence were not coming out so clearly in volume 1, child abuse issues, early child marriage, which are really hot topics in Zambia at the moment. The issues of addressing migration and mobility was also touched on a bit in volume 1, but not so clearly. And we already do realize that Zambia is been receiving a lot of an influx of refugees from DRC this year. So it's a country which is bordered by 8 countries. So the chances of migration and mobility are really high. So it was really a key area that we thought needed to be addressed. Water and sanitation was also not very clear yet. We do realize that in Zambia, the sanitation issue, sanitation and water are really some gray areas that need to be addressed. And data availability and disaggregation, insufficient indicators to monitor the National Development Plan. This was also one of the other major area. So based on this analysis of the rapid integrated assessment, we're able to now to come up with a very informed methodology that would address these gaps and ensure that we have a very strong volume 2 that speaks to volume 1, but also is well mainstream to the SDGs. And this document we're actually in the process of finalizing, and it's an integrated approach that we've taken, as my colleague has said, from the silo approach of the sectors. When you look at volume 1 and volume 2, you cannot really pick the sectors, but you find that each of the programs, they are so much interlinked, and there are different players from the different sectors that are contributing to that. So this is, which is really the way, the approach that the Agenda 2030 is, of being interlinked and interrelated. So we're really quite pleased, and we've heard that for Zambia, this is the first, one of the first countries that has developed a national development plan in the SDG era. So it's really a good attempt and very brave move by the government of Zambia. So in terms of success factors and lessons learned, the number 1 was really that this was the first and bold attempt of the government of Zambia in planning using the integrated approach. It is not an easy thing to do, moving away from your comfort zone, and even for the sectors themselves, it requires a lot of mindset change. Not to feel that there's something that has been taken away from them, but to still feel that they're in charge of the delivery of the 7th plan, even though now they're working together with others. So it's really a brave move. It's a courageous move that the government has taken, and once implemented will really reap good fruits. The second one is that is the RBM, or the results-based management approach, that drove the need for integrated thinking and planning. Because the focus now was on what is it that we want to achieve, or what are the needs of the country. It drove away people from thinking in the silo approach or in their comfort zones. So already during the development of Volume 2, you could see the integrated thinking. You could have somebody who is in the Ministry of Energy saying, you know what, I need to talk to the Minister of Infrastructure so that we see how do we link together in this project. So already the integrated thinking started in the development because of the results-based management approach that was taken on board. The third one is the increased knowledge of how to identify, position, and articulate results. This took quite some time for people to get to this position because we are so much used to activity planning. So moving to a results-based planning, there was some training that had to be done, and not just one training, but iterative training sessions to ensure that everybody has an understanding of the results-based management language. It was also quite highly engaging, interactive, and an intense process, I must say, and it took a bit of time. We then had to have a dedicated 2 weeks to lock up people from all the clusters, that is with representation from the sectors, to work on finalizing the first good draft of the Volume 2, and people went right into the night and they were quite engaged, which was really good. So what we're seeing now with the Volume 2 is that we've moved away from activity-based budgeting to results-based budgeting, which is really linked to the 7 National Development Plan. In the past, you would see that you have a National Development Plan, but the budgeting is done almost in parallel. So you don't see the link between what it is that the government has planned for the 5 years and how the budgeting is going. But with this new plan, we've already seen the shift into results-based budgeting, and also even the way the government is doing the quarterly progress reports to the president. It's no longer by sectors, but it's actually by those 5 clusters. So you have all the ministers who are responsible for each of the cluster reporting together to the president on the progress and the challenges that they're facing towards implementation of their programs. Another success factor is the consistent and sustained policy implementation, and that there's the implementation of the fiscal decentralization, devolution. These are really the key enablers for the success of an integrated approach of this manner. And the issue of statistical data availability, it has now become the talk. Unlike before that, we really need to have data for us to be able to program and for us to be able to see progress in what we're doing and the reforms that are going on already in the country. The 8th one, the success factor, is that you cannot have a plan on itself and not relook at your coordination mechanisms. So they also changed the approach of how they're coordinating as the government. So they moved away from the sectoral approach also to the integrated approaches, the cluster advisory groups, which my colleague has already alluded to. And the last one, I think with everything that we are doing, in any kind of change, you need to have an effective communication strategy for it to be a success, especially of this magnitude. So there's also a communication strategy that the government has also is also currently working on and trying to ensure that every person understands the 7th plan. I'll talk into detail on the communications later. So, which is now here. So the first, in terms of now, at the moment, the new one, it is the first component is on the communications. And for any mindset shift, it takes time. And you really need to plan how you ensure that you reach out to all the key stakeholders beyond the government, beyond the UN, to the communities, to the people on the streets, so that they know what the government is working towards and how can they hold the government accountable for their human rights. So the communication strategy, which is in draft at the moment, but already work is going on, it really comprises of sensitizing the government officials and stakeholders on the 7th plan together with the SDGs. So we were not leaving out the SDGs because we know our plan is already aligned to the SDGs. Public awareness campaigning. strategic messages and working with different institutions so that everybody understands radio programs, TV programs, all that is already underway and going on to really get everybody on board. The Ministry of National Planning was in the field in the past 2 weeks, going out to all the provinces to disseminate this 7 national development plan so that everybody knows what it is that we're talking about. Second part is the coordination. In terms of the SDGs, I'm happy to say the government has introduced a committee within each of the clusters, a subcommittee on SDGs, which is responsible for SDGs implementation and financing. So this is really a good move that we're already integrating within the national coordination structures. How can we ensure that the SDGs are taken on board across the ministries, across all the key stakeholders? The other section is on financing of the SDGs. This is really key. And a plan of this kind, of the 7th plan, is quite, as I said, very courageous and quite ambitious, just like the SDGs are. So the issue of sustainable financing is key. And the ministry and the government is looking into the non-traditional financing sources so that you know, we're not just looking at the usual traditional donors, because now we require more as this is a needs-based plan. And then in terms of monitoring reporting of the SDGs, this national development plan is got specific and like smart targets that have been put in there, which is good, and year-on-year targets. So the monitoring even of the SDGs will be together with the monitoring of the 7th plan. So we're not going to have a separate SDG report, but it will be the same report that is produced annually by the 7th plan, will incorporate also the progress in terms of the SDGs. The National Statistical Office is also going through some restructuring. They've just adopted the National Statistic Development Strategy. So which is really a good move to ensure that it's really well resourced to be able to deliver on the statistics that the country needs. There's also a National Sustainable Development Indicator Framework and Information System that is also underway and being developed together with the Central Statistical Office and the M&E personnel in the government. So a lot of work is going on at the moment. It's not an easy task, but it's quite good that the government has realized the need to have all this that I've mentioned on this SDG coordination and implementation framework for the success of the SDGs in Zambia. So what have been the challenges? Obviously, we've had quite some challenges. And I think I've said it has not been easy a number of times already in my presentation. And these are reasons why I've been saying it's not easy. Number one is embracing the complexity of the leave no one behind principle and moving away from sectoral to multi-sectoral integrated was really a challenge, or is still a constraint. I don't know if I like to use challenge, maybe a constraint, really, because it's when you're looking at leave no one behind, it means you require a lot of data for you to even know who is left behind. And then, as we all know, for developing countries, we have quite some challenges in terms of data. So just embracing this principle is really, it's not been easy. The SDGs are very ambitious. And yes, we've tried very much for this 7th plan to address as much as we can, but not all. But as we know, it's a 5-year plan. And we're going to have 2 more national development plans. So we've put that really, we know that we're working towards the next 15 years. So whatever it is that we might not have covered in this plan will be covered in the coming years. But, you know, there's always a tendency, it's difficult to say, let's not look at this SDG target and prioritize on this one. It was not an easy thing to do, to kind of like choose or prioritize the SDGs, but had to be done. The limited understanding of SDGs across the key stakeholders, the SDGs have just come into play, and not so many people are familiar. We cannot sing them yet, like we did the MDGs. So it took quite some time to get people to understand the SDGs and to get them on board. The results-based approach, I think I did mention that already. the limited understanding and getting people to move from activity-based to results-based also took a bit of the time. In the change of mindset, I think this is key. The whole of government approach, breaking down silos, the government is still working on that. It's going to take some time to really get to the whole of government approach, but we should get there. It's the exercise of mainstreaming the SDGs into the 7th plan was really capital intensive and very time consuming. It took a lot of time. I mean, to get to where we are now, it took quite some time and it was very capital intensive. The limited capacity of key staff for leading and coordinating the planning processes. And it was mainly because they have as the Minister of Development Planning, they also have other duties, daily or core duties that they have to take care of every day. But at the same time, there was this huge plan they were looking at and they had to develop. So it was not very easy. And we had to co-opt to help as the UN to get some facilitators to help them to move the process forward. Yeah. So lastly, going forward, just adding on to what my colleague said on the role of philanthropy, I think the key message here is that for Zambia, the 7 Nation Development Plan is really the entry point for all key stakeholders to support SDG mainstreaming national development. So, and as you already have seen, really the 7th plan is trying to take care of probably 80 to 90% of the 2030 agenda. So it's in a good place. Everybody can fit in and is able to support or find their place in the 7 Nation Development Plan. And I think what is key moving forward, the next steps is really the strategic communications and dissemination of the SDGs and the 7th plan. This is quite some time intensive and also capital intensive exercise. And there will really be a need for the role of the philanthropy to support in terms of ensuring that everybody understands the SDGs and are able to hold the government accountable. The financing of the 7th plan, directly or indirectly, is also key. As I already said, we need to move away from the usual traditional donors to support this task that we have at hand. The strengthening of the system of disaggregated data collection and analysis is also key, and also the monitoring and reporting, so that we don't just end by saying, oh, we have a very good plan in our shelf, but how are we monitoring and how are we reporting to ensure that we're able to reach the results that we have put in that plan. So I think this should be all from our side, and thank you for your listening, and I take it back to our hostess here. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much to both our presenters for a really engaging and interesting presentation, highlighting Zambia's pioneering approach in mainstreaming the SDGs in its development plan. I would now like to open the floor to the audience for any questions you may have for either of the panelists. So feel free to raise your hand, or you can also type your question in the chat or questions section.
Hi, Carrie.
Hello.
Hi there. This is Maribel. So I have a question for the panelists. I was wondering what is the ministry? Thank you so much for this great webinar. I was wondering how the Ministry of National Development Planning is planning to engage young people and children in this process, and how they can be active stakeholders in decision-making processes. This is something that the UN has put a lot of, has highlighted a lot. So I'm wondering what you'll be doing from Zambia. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, Maribel.
Yes. Thanks, Maribel, for your question. Yes, this is one area I missed. You know, Zambia being such a youthful population, definitely the young people have a part to play in the planning and development. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, that our role was really a convening role to ensure that all key stakeholders are involved in the planning process itself. This was done for the development of Volume 2. And from our side, as the UN, we have formed a platform, which is called the UN Youth Partnership Platform, with representation from all the 10 provinces in the country, and ages 15 to 35. So we have this platform where the young people are able to engage, we're able to engage with the government or to review even the Volume 1, give their suggestions, and the development of Volume 2. The reason being that we do have a number of youth groups in the country, but they're facing challenges really in the coordination of the youth platforms. So that is why the UN had to step in and come up with this platform. And also this platform, actually its role is also to work very closely with the Ministry of Youth to strengthen the national coordination structures, which at the moment are not working very well. So we have engaged in terms of young people 15 to 35 in terms of the development of Volume 2. As we speak right now, they're in the process of going into the districts. The UNYPP, which I talked about, they're going into the provinces from next week to engage with the young people on the SDGs and the 7th plan in the provinces. So, and we're working together with the National Women Planning and also the Ministry of Youth in that exercise. And so there are quite a lot of ways that I think the ministry is trying to ensure that there's engagement of all the key stakeholders across the different ages and across the country. My colleague has something to add also.
Thank you so much for that question. Actually, in our issues paper, one of the key issues that came out was the issue of unemployment, and specifically youth unemployment. Generally, unemployment amongst the youth is very, very high. You'll be talking in the range of 70% plus. But one of the things through our development plan that we've realized is within it, we've developed what we are calling quick win projects, basically to create jobs for the targeting the youth. I can cite an example of each province now. We've got 10 provinces in the country. Each province has been requested, and I think they've submitted to procure 50,000 hectares for pine plantations. Yeah, for pine plantations, targeting to employ youths. So a number of youth organizations have approached our office so that they can take part in the implementation of 7 NDP, and we are engaging them. Some have come through the UN system, others have come through the Office of the Secretary to Cabinet, and we are very happy to work with them. And then also government has what we call Youth Empowerment Fund, through which it encourages the youth to get into business and engage in private business. I think
Thank you. I see that we have a question from Kritikos Nshindano. I will just unmute you so that you can ask your question. Please go ahead, Kritikos.
Thank you. Afternoon, everyone. It's quite strange to be asking questions when you've been involved in the process quite a lot. We've done quite a good job in developing the 7 NDP. But I'm looking at an area, I think, which also the SDG philanthropy could also look at, and maybe more towards the UN system as a whole in terms of the gaps. And this is specifically with the existing data gaps. One of the things that you see with Volume 2 is the issue to do with the baselines. The data that is informing the Volume 2 is basically existing data. And no robust, fresh data has been collected, and I think this is critical for both indicator development that are linked to the SDG, but also the monitoring process, especially that the frequency will be quite high, given that it will be on an annual basis in terms of monitoring. And I think it's a critical area to be able to determine the success of the 7th NDP. And I think another area of challenge is basically the period within which the 7th NDP is running, which is during a physically constrained position as a country. And I think for us to really succeed in SDG implementation at the 7th NDP as a whole, we need to try and pull in as much resources as possible as a country. And I think this is where now key strategic partnerships become critical, such as the SDGs philanthropy. Thank you.
We could not agree with you more, Kritekas. Thank you very much for that. And indeed, these are critical areas, especially on the issues of data and the issues of financing. And we're hopeful that with once the bill is passed, I think it's been put on the planning and budgeting bill. Once it's passed in Parliament, it will be a good platform for us to really take forward the issues of data and strengthening the central statistical system, also even other stakeholders here.
Thank you for that. We have time just for one or two more questions in case anyone has any.
Yes, Kerry, if I may ask a question?
Sure, please go ahead, Natalia.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Natalia speaking from Istanbul. I would like to thank the panelists for this very interesting presentation. I enjoyed a lot, especially in the depths of the process that you have taken it so seriously, and you have considered so many important things in your National Development Plan implementation. So, as you already stated many times, we should move away from working in silence, and we should extend the cooperation and partnership to other stakeholders. So my question is whether you have any specific plans in mind or in vision how you would like to engage other important stakeholders such as private sector, such as foundations, philanthropists, social investors, and civil society organizations. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that observation and question. I can't agree with you more that to achieve this, I think maybe we didn't go further to explain the membership of some of the cluster advisory groups. One of the participants, Mr. Shindano, he is from the civil society. He's a key member of one of the clusters, and not just the civil society, also the private sector has participated in some of the deliberations of the cluster advisory groups. This is in the form of business associations, in the form of even business entities, and we go further, even faith-based organizations and the academia are also involved. And even what we call traditional leadership, they are also involved at different levels. So we appreciate the fact that this is a national document, and also the concept of decentralization means you have to engage as many people as possible at all levels. So I hope that sort of clarifies the issue. Thank you.
Okay, we have time for one more question, and if no one has any questions, we can end there. Okay, it appears that there are no more questions. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, it has been recorded, and a link will be sent out in the next couple of days in case you'd like to revisit the presentations or anything. So thank you very much for tuning in today, and thank you very much to both of our panelists. Wish you all a good rest of the day.
Thank you.